There's one thing God never wanted you to tell anyone, and when you finally understand why, everything in your spiritual life shifts. This isn't about keeping secrets. This is about understanding that some doors God opens aren't meant to be announced until they become the ground you walk on. Because the moment you speak what's still being formed, you don't just risk losing it. You invite forces that were never meant to touch it. Have you ever trusted someone with your deepest hope, only to watch them become the very person who tried to destroy it? Have you ever felt a door beginning to crack open in your life, a new opportunity, a shift in your calling, a relationship taking shape, and the second you mentioned it, everything fell apart? Have you ever noticed that the peace you carried in private completely vanished the moment you tried to explain it out loud? You're not imagining it, and you're not cursed. You just spoke before the foundation was set. You announced what was still under construction, and in that moment, you didn't just lose privacy, you lost protection. Because here's what most people don't realize. There's a sacred space between God's whisper and your witness. Whoa, a space where heaven is working, where your spirit is being prepared, where the door isn't just opening, it's being fortified so that when you finally walk through, nothing can shut it behind you. But when you speak too soon, you don't just expose the door, you expose yourself. Let me show you what happens in the unseen when you announce what God is still building. Picture this. You're standing in front of a door. It's heavy, ancient, and it's beginning to move. You can feel the shift. You can sense something on the other side calling your name. But the hinges are still being oiled. The frame is still being reinforced. The lock is still being removed piece by piece. This is where most people make the fatal mistake. They turn around and shout, "Look, my door is opening." And in that instant, three things happen simultaneously. First, doubt enters the room, not from God, from the people you told. They ask questions you weren't ready to answer. They want proof you don't have yet. They demand clarity about something that's still being revealed to you in fragments. And suddenly, you're no longer walking by faith. You're defending a vision that was never meant to be justified to human understanding. Second, spiritual interference begins. The enemy doesn't need to see the full blueprint of your life to disrupt it. He just needs a clue, a hint, a careless word, and your premature announcement just gave him one. Now he knows where to send confusion, where to plant fear, where to assign voices that will make you question whether that door was ever really opening at all. Third, and this is the most painful, you start performing instead of preparing. Because once other people know, you feel pressure to make it happen faster, to prove it wasn't just talk, to show results before the process is complete. And in rushing to validate what you said, you step out of God's timing and into your own striving. This is why so many believers feel spiritually exhausted. They're not tired from the journey. They're tired from explaining the journey to people who were never meant to walk it with them. The Bible doesn't just warn us about this. It shows us the wreckage of those who spoke too soon. Look at Hagar in Genesis 16. The moment she realized she was carrying Abraham's child, Scripture says she began to despise Sarah. Why? Because she announced her blessing before it was secure. She revealed her position before it was confirmed. And that premature disclosure didn't elevate her. It isolated her. It turned her miracle into a source of conflict, and she ended up fleeing into the wilderness, unsure if she'd even survive. Or consider King Saul. In 1 Samuel 13, he couldn't wait for the priest. He couldn't sit in the tension of uncertainty. He had to act, he had to be seen doing something, and that impatience, that need to announce his authority before God confirmed it, cost him his kingdom. But then there's Nehemiah. When God placed the burden on his heart to rebuild Jerusalem's walls, he didn't tell anyone, not immediately. Nehemiah 2:12 says, "I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do." He arrived in Jerusalem, surveyed the ruins by night, and kept his mouth shut until he understood the full scope of what God was asking. Why? Because Nehemiah understood something most people miss. A vision shared too early becomes a vision that has to be defended. And you can't build walls while you're busy answering critics. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to seek permission. It wasn't to get validation. It was to mobilize those who were already aligned with God's plan. And because he waited for the right moment, the right people responded. The wall that had been broken for decades was rebuilt in 52 days. That's the power of spiritual timing. That's what happens when you let God finish the blueprint before you show it to the world. Think about a seed. When you plant it, you don't dig it up every day to check if it's growing. You don't announce to the neighborhood, "I just planted a seed. Come watch it grow." Because you understand that growth happens in darkness, in hiddenness, in a place where no one can see. And if you expose it too early, if you pull it from the soil to prove it's alive, you kill it. Your calling works the same way. That door God is opening. It's still germinating. The roots are forming beneath the surface. The strength is being built in a place no one can see. And if you dig it up to show people, if you announce it before it's rooted, you don't just pause the growth, you abort it. Or think about oil. In biblical times, fresh oil was sacred. It was used to anoint kings, to consecrate priests, to mark what God had set apart. But oil exposed to air too soon would lose its potency. It would evaporate. It would attract dust and debris. That's why anointing was done in private first. That's why priests were consecrated behind closed doors. That's why David was anointed king years before he ever wore the crown. Because God was teaching them, and us, that what is holy must be covered until it's ready to pour. When you announce your anointing prematurely, you don't multiply it. You contaminate it. You let in opinions that were never meant to touch what God is doing. And before you know it, you're trying to defend something that should have stayed between you and heaven. Here's the part most believers don't realize. The enemy can't read your mind. He's not omniscient. He can't see what God is whispering to your spirit in the middle of the night. He doesn't know about the dreams you're having, the shifts you're feeling, the doors that are beginning to crack open. But the moment you speak it, he knows. Your words become his intel. Your announcements become his strategy. And he doesn't even have to work that hard because now he knows exactly where to aim. Think about it. When you tell people about the business God is birthing in you, suddenly you encounter unexpected financial setbacks. When you mention the relationship you believe God is aligning, suddenly conflict erupts out of nowhere. When you talk about the calling you're stepping into, suddenly every insecurity you thought you'd overcome comes flooding back. Coincidence? No. Consequence. You opened a door in the spirit that wasn't ready to be opened, and what rushed in wasn't encouragement. It was warfare. This is why Proverbs 21:23 says, "Whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from troubles." It's not about being secretive. It's about being strategic. It's about understanding that silence isn't weakness, it's warfare. Because what the enemy doesn't know about, he can't attack. And there's something else happening in the spiritual realm that most people never consider. When you announce something prematurely, you're not just informing people. You're releasing energy into an atmosphere that may not be ready to receive it. You're planting your vision in soil that hasn't been prepared. You're pouring water into a cup that has cracks you can't see. Every word carries frequency. Every declaration shifts something in the unseen. And when you speak about what God is forming before it has structure, before it has roots, before it has the strength to withstand scrutiny, you're essentially asking that fragile thing to defend itself in hostile territory. Think about a newborn baby. When a child is born premature, what do doctors do? They don't parade the baby around. They don't put it on display. They place it in an incubator, a controlled environment, protected, monitored, shielded from germs, from temperature shifts, from anything that could threaten its survival. Your vision is no different. When it's born too early into the world's atmosphere, when you expose it before it's ready, it doesn't matter how powerful that vision is. It's vulnerable. And vulnerability without protection is an invitation for attack. So the question isn't whether your calling is real. The question is whether you're mature enough to protect it while it's still developing. Because God doesn't just give you a vision and expect you to broadcast it. He gives you a vision and watches to see if you have the discipline to steward it in secret first. But let's go deeper. Because sometimes the danger isn't just spiritual, it's relational. You ever notice how the people closest to you can become the most resistant when God starts elevating you? It's not always jealousy. Sometimes it's comfort. They've gotten used to you at a certain level, and your promotion disrupts their perception. You tell your family about the door God is opening, and instead of excitement, you get skepticism. Are you sure? That doesn't sound like you. What if it doesn't work out? You share your vision with friends, and instead of support, you get silence. Or worse, false enthusiasm that feels hollow. You confide in someone you thought was safe, and later you discover they've been speaking doubt over your life behind your back. This isn't betrayal. This is misalignment. You gave access to people who weren't assigned to your process. You invited voices into a conversation they were never meant to be part of. And here's the painful truth. Not everyone who loves you can handle your calling. Not everyone who celebrates you can carry the weight of what God is doing in you. Some people are only anointed for certain seasons of your life. And when you outgrow that season, trying to drag them into the next one only creates tension. This is why Jesus had the crowds, the 72, the 12, the 3, and then moments where he went off alone. He understood levels. He understood that not everyone was ready for everything. When God is opening a door in your life, you don't owe everyone an explanation. You don't need a committee to approve what heaven already confirmed. You just need to obey in private until it's time to walk through in public. There's also something deeply psychological happening when you speak too soon. You create what experts call premature cognitive closure. Your brain starts treating the vision as if it's already accomplished simply because you've articulated it. You get a hit of dopamine from the act of sharing, from the reactions, from the attention, and that false sense of completion actually robs you of the motivation to do the real work. It's why people who constantly talk about their goals rarely achieve them. The talking becomes a substitute for the doing. The planning becomes a replacement for the execution. And before they realize it, they've spent more energy defending their dreams than building them. But there's a deeper layer to this. When you announce what God is doing before it's time, you also rob yourself of the gift of mystery. You lose the sacred tension of walking by faith. You trade the quiet confidence of knowing for the anxious need to prove. And in that trade, something precious dies. The intimacy between you and God gets diluted because now there are other voices in the room. God speaks in whispers for a reason, not because he's weak, but because he's testing whether you'll lean in close enough to hear him, whether you'll value his voice above the noise, whether you'll treasure what he says enough to keep it sacred. And when you can do that, when you can sit with a promise without needing to broadcast it, when you can carry a vision without needing to validate it, something shifts in your spirit. You mature. You deepen. You become the kind of vessel God can trust with greater revelations because you've proven you know how to steward the smaller ones. Now let's talk about what God does while you're silent. When you stop explaining and start preparing, when you stop announcing and start obeying, God goes to work in ways you can't see. He's aligning people you haven't met yet. He's closing doors that would have led you astray. He's removing obstacles you didn't even know were in your path. He's strengthening you for what's coming, not just the blessing, but the responsibility that comes with it. Because here's what most people forget. Every door God opens comes with a weight. A new level requires new capacity. And if He promoted you before you were ready, the blessing would crush you. So while you're silent, He's building your endurance. He's testing your obedience when no one's watching. He's seeing if you'll still worship when there's no audience. He's checking if you'll still prepare when there's no applause. This is the wilderness season, the incubation season, the season where nothing makes sense on the outside, but everything is shifting on the inside. And if you can stay quiet during this season, if you can resist the urge to prove yourself, if you can let God finish what He started without interference, then when the door finally swings open, it won't just be cracked. It will be wide, immovable, undeniable. Let's be honest about the emotional cost of speaking too soon. You feel exposed, vulnerable, like you gave away something precious and now you can't get it back. You feel regret, wishing you'd kept your mouth shut, wishing you'd trusted the process instead of needing validation. You feel anxious, because now people are watching, waiting to see if what you said will actually happen. And their expectations, whether supportive or skeptical, become a weight you were never meant to carry. And worst of all, you feel spiritually distant, because the intimacy you had with God when it was just the two of you, it's been diluted, polluted by outside voices. And now when you pray, you're not just talking to God, you're replaying conversations, defending your vision, trying to convince yourself it's still real. This is the price of premature disclosure, and it's a price too many believers are paying without even realizing it. So here's what you need to understand. Silence isn't hiding. Silence is honoring what's still being formed. That door God is opening. Don't tell anyone until it becomes the path you're already walking. Don't announce the promotion until you're already in the new position. Don't talk about the healing until you're already whole. Don't reveal the calling until you're already operating in it. Because when you wait, when you protect what's sacred, you don't lose the blessing. You secure it. You give God room to work without interference. You give yourself space to grow without pressure. You give the enemy no ammunition. And you give the right people a testimony instead of a theory. This is where your life got stuck. Not because God stopped moving, but because you spoke before the foundation was set. You announced what was still under construction. And in trying to prove it to people, you stepped out of alignment with heaven. But here's the good news. It's not too late. That door isn't locked. It's just waiting for you to stop explaining and start obeying. Stop announcing and start advancing. Stop seeking validation from voices that were never meant to confirm what God already did. Guard what God is building. Protect what's still forming. And when the time is right, when the door is fully open, when the path is clear, when your feet are firmly planted on the other side, then your life will preach louder than your words ever could. Move in silence. Let God move in power. And watch what happens when you stop telling people what's coming and just let them see where you've arrived. If this message hit you where you needed it, write, "I'm guarding it" in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's been speaking too soon and paying the price, share this with them. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is helping someone protect what God is doing in their life. Stay quiet, stay focused, and let your obedience speak for itself.